Hi everyone. Thanks so much for coming to BostonJS tonight. I know this corner of Somerville is a little bit out of the way, and I'm really glad to see you all here. My name is Jen Weber, and tonight I'm going to be presenting on debugging secrets of the pros for everyone. I'm an engineer at Cardstack, which is a startup based in New York City. We're building a platform that helps people to create apps for this decentralized web as well as regular web apps. I also work on Ember, as Justin mentioned. I'm on the core team for that. Ember is a front-end framework. Thank you. And I also mentioned my previous employer, BioBright, which was a startup I worked at for about 3 years. And these 3 settings are where I've learned a bunch of the tips and tricks that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So when I say this is about debugging secrets of the pros for everyone, the pros are the people who I have paired with at each of these organizations, as well as a handful of consultants and people I've met through open source. And what I learned was that when they're debugging things, like the people who I look up to as the pros, when they're debugging things, they were doing a lot different than I was. I was just like console.logging, like my life depended on it. And I was thinking, who are these magical people with secret knowledge that lets them just understand these really complex code bases? And while they might have secret knowledge, like maybe they just haven't told it to me yet, they do have some tools that they use that were different than what I had initially learned as a JavaScript developer. So I'm going to show you some of those techniques tonight. And we're going to do a little bit of live coding. I'll actually show you how I debugged something earlier this week using the patterns that one of my fellow developers taught me, like when I started at my new job. So I want to start with a poll. I mentioned I console.log everything. How do you all, work on debugging? Raise your hand if your go-to tool is console.log. Yes. Okay. How about if you change things until it works? Also me. That's not my first go-to, but I did that today. Who here uses a debugger? All right. So for those of you who use a debugger, do you use the browser debugger? All right, some. And how about like a node debugger like in VS Code? Okay, not that many. Ooh, this is exciting. All right, that's the part I practice the most, so it's gonna be good. And then the last thing here is just like sit and have like a good think about the source code. Yeah, all right, sometimes you gotta dig into that level. So as I mentioned, I use console.log, and console.log is fine. It's great. It gets the job done. It served me well for about 2.5 years before I really hit a wall where I thought, like, what even is this code and what am I doing? So my first point here is when we're talking about these debugging secrets, the first is to use the right tools. Now, I used to do a little bit of woodworking in the past, and one of the things that I learned right away is that when you have the right tools, things are a lot easier. But you can also brute force your way through with something that isn't quite right. You just might struggle unnecessarily. Like maybe I would really love to have a table saw, but the thing that's handy is a handsaw, and I might be able to do the job using that. So there's nothing wrong with falling back on the basics like console.log, but sometimes there's more powerful things that are available. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to go through a couple different things that you might be able to try in your life at work or on your side projects recently. So what I would like to suggest as a goal is that for each of you, over the next week, maybe you pick something from this list that we're about to go over and give it a try. Just one thing, like no need to overwhelm with trying too many new things at once. And if it works well for you, share it with your coworkers, because a lot of times I found that the more experienced developers I work with don't know when they're doing something special that's worth sharing or showing to others, and it's really just by long pairing sessions that I picked up on a bunch of these things. All right. So the first one here is the browser debugger. And let me pull up. So I've got here, I'm just going to give you a quick example of how you could use debugger in basically any front-end JavaScript. Let me make this just a tiny bit bigger. This is so hard to read, this layout. Anyway, so what I've done here is I've just added the word debugger. This is something that's framework agnostic. You can just throw it in anywhere in your code that will run in the browser. So I've got that running in an app over here, and I need 2 hands for this. Is there a stand? No. I'm going to set it down. If I'm too quiet, please tell me, and I will try to pick this mic back up. Okay. All right, so, it's so quiet. So I'm going to open up my console here. That has to be open in order for the debugger to work. You wouldn't want a stray debugger to stop your production code from running. That would be not awesome. If I click on something that, like this is, I know this, clicking on this button is going to trigger my debugger code. Now, I can go over here. This is in Chrome. There's also some similar tools in Firefox. And I can see right here, I'll make it even bigger. That's the debugger that I put in my code before I started serving this app. And the cool thing is that while my app is paused, I can actually take a look and inspect the values of different variables that are in scope. So I can see here that there's a local variable called statue, and its value is watched movies. This is a movie tracker app. So debugger I have found to be supremely useful when I'm working in a code base that I didn't write. And so I want to know what every single argument is that's going into something if I'm about to modify it or if I'm trying to debug some weird behavior. Once you're in this environment, you can actually click to step through the code. Let me make this even bigger. So now you can see we're kind of giving a check here, like if statue equals watched movies, something's going to happen. And I can actually see that this condition has been satisfied and what the effect would be. Another cool thing is I can actually go over here in the console of the browser DevTools, and I can see what the values are. I can also interact with them. So if I wanted to set a value, this is a pretty common pattern in Ember. If you want to change the value of something that shows up in the DOM, you've got to use this .set. Kind of ties in a little bit with what Justin was talking about. I can set that and actually interact with some of my framework's APIs. So this is something that you can try out no matter what framework you're using. If you're doing vanilla JavaScript, it really lets you kind of explore what's going on. In here you can also set what's referred to as breakpoints. So you can click on any of these lines here. This little label that's showing up, it's very small, is saying that when, hey Chrome, when you get to this line of code, I want you to stop again. And so now I can actually interact with this code here in the browser, and I can not have to put debuggers straight into my actual app code that was over here in my code editor. This is a super powerful feature. There could be like a 1-hour workshop on just using your browser's DevTools. So if this is exciting or interesting to you, if this is something you're like, oh yeah, I can see how that would help me stop using console.log, watch some YouTube videos to learn more about how you can really dig into this. It's pretty incredible. It's almost like its own coding environment. All right. The next thing we're going to talk about here is the code editor debugger. And when I say code editor debugger, I'm talking mostly about VS Code. However, there are other code editors have their own debugging environments as well. So Let me pull this up here. My terminal. All right. So who here uses VS Code, just a show of hands? Okay, most everybody. Just very briefly, what I'll say about VS Code is that I'm running the terminal just like I would run my terminal, like my command line terminal. I'm running that down here, so any commands that would work in that terminal, like I can CD into things, I can run my tests from here, it's just a terminal. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to show you a little bit about a problem that I ran into this past week, and I'll show you how I used the VS Code debugging tools in order to solve it. Over the past 3 months, I've been working on a lot of framework level code, like really mind-bendy meta stuff that I didn't write, and sometimes I don't even know, what the goal of a certain function is. And this has been so important for me in order to be able to dig in and actually help fix bugs, or in this case, I'm working on a refactor. So I won't go into too many details here, but I changed this line of code, and about 58 tests failed. So I'll show you my failing tests. I'm running a subset of the test because the whole test suite would take a very long time. By the way, is this big enough? I can make it bigger if it's needed. All right, so let's have a look here. This error is saying cannot read property split of null, and it appears that the error is coming from one of my dependencies, which is a library called isomorphic git. The library name alone should tell you that we're dealing with some like esoteric stuff. It's a library that is lets you use Node in order to make git commits, either on your hard drive or in a browser environment using a virtual file system. It's like pretty deep in there. So I don't know what could possibly be going wrong here. So what I'm going to do first is think like, okay, well, maybe it was me. I'm going to add a breakpoint to this code, this line here. Oh, I zoomed in too big. So if you hover over to the edge here, you can like create this little red dot. And this is going to say, hey, VS Code, when you get to this line of code, I want you to stop. It's really similar to how we put debugger in the browser earlier. And in order for VS Code to kind of like hook in and watch for when this happens, we're going to use what's called the debugger. And a debugger has a configuration file that tells it which commands to run. This configuration file looks kind of scary, but if you look very closely at this example, all we're doing is we are running the Mocha tests. This is kind of where my test suite is running from. That's the name of the file that kind of kicks off the job. And I'm saying like, hey, this is grep, I want to search for tests that have this name, because I only want to try to tackle one test at a time. When I click run, VS Code is actually going to run this command. It's going to run Mocha test for me, and it will open up the debugging view. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. I'm going to push play. And we can actually look at the debug console over here. So, pretty cool thing is that I didn't write this code. I don't know what this stuff is. I can actually hover over these things and see what the values are. One of the parts that I changed here in this code was I changed the path of something. And so I can actually call this function here, repo.path, down in my debug console and see what its value is. I want to make sure that I didn't pass like a bad path or something undefined to this function. So I can actually, interact with this code from down here in the debug console. So this is pretty cool. But this doesn't really help me. It just tells me that my parameters that I'm passing into this add remote function, they're fine. So now what? How do I explore what text.split is undefined or whatever? I don't know what that is. So I can actually see in the output from my tests, it will tell me, let me run those again. I can just scroll up here. It tells me where the problem is coming from. So I can actually command click to go to that line. Now I've gone one level deeper. This isn't my code. This isn't my coworker's code. This is the dependency. And I can see like, okay, it's calling split. It says that text is undefined. Text is what's being passed in. So I mean, that doesn't really give me much. So I can right click on this and do go to definition, or rather find all references. I'm going to see what's using this git config. There's a function called from, and then I'm going to find all references to from, and then let's see, git config from text. And I can see, I don't know what this is, any of this, but I can see that it is trying to read from the file system that there's a Git directory, and it's looking for a file called config. This is interesting, and this is something that's actionable to me, because maybe whatever Gitdir isn't right. So I'm just kind of like exploratory surgery style. I'm going to put a breakpoint there, and I'm going to rerun my tests using the debugger. That was my first place that I had one. Okay, so now we stepped over the first debugger. Now I'm in here, and I can actually see what Gitdir is. All right, so I can see that Gitdir is this big, scary long path that's somewhere in my temporary directory. And I actually want to see if there's a file there called config. So I'll go to the debug console. I'll see, I want Gitdir in a place that I can copy and paste it. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go look up what is there. And I can see that there's no such file called .git. There's no such file, well, there's a config. There's no such file called .git, which was what it was really looking. It was looking for Gitdir, yada, 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 .git /config. There's no .git. So we just went through, yep. I have no idea. Can you say that again, though, just in case? Oh, yes, he was mentioning it's a hidden file. I think in this case it just didn't exist because I was pointing to like a different format of this, but I don't know. Ooh, let's take a look. Nada. So, good idea though. Hidden files are definitely a thing to look for when you're debugging. This is the power of pair programming. Thank you, Jason. So this was super mind-bending code. This whole business about Git and following things through, I don't expect you to understand any of that. What my goal here is actually to show you the flow of how I was able to kind of follow the thread through code I didn't write, check what my different parameters are, and see what was going wrong. So in the end, I was able to fix this bug by changing one of the parameters over here. Instead of dir, which was supposed to be the directory to get to the Git file, ironically is named getdir. If we save that, we finish the test here. If I save that and I go back and I run my tests, Now they pass. So I had to look at the documentation to figure out that that needed to be getdir instead of directory. But knowing that I was trying to access a path that didn't exist was the key to debugging this. So this was like a whole afternoon of my life, but that was more or less the path that I followed. So learning to use the Git or the VS Code debugger is a skill unto itself. Kind of like how if you're doing woodworking, you have to practice with the power tools in order to be good at building things. You got to practice with this. You got to watch some YouTube videos. But I promise you, this will pay off hugely if you invest the time in it and you have the patience to seek out how to use it well. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is digging into the source code. You saw us do this a little bit with an open source library that I didn't write. But I just want to kind of give a general reminder here that when you're using open source libraries, they're not written by, these like incredible gods and goddesses who are the rulers of all JavaScript. They're written by all different developers of all different experience levels and abilities, and every single one of those people is going to make mistakes. And so don't always assume that the backing library is perfect. Don't always assume that the documentation is complete. Go look at their docs, search through pull requests and issues. Even if something got fixed and it's merged in, it might not be out in a release yet. That's bitten me a couple times. I thought, this should be fixed. I can see here in the code where it's fixed. Why isn't it working for me? It wasn't released. It was unreleased. It was in a beta or something. And then lastly, when in doubt, look at the tests of the code that you're working in. The tests are there to define kind of what is the supported behavior of this library, and especially when documentation is sparse, the tests become the documentation. The next trick I want to share with you is to explore dependencies in Node. So what I never really thought about that I could do, I learned this from someone else, was if you're unfamiliar with a library that your project is using, when you're actually in the directory for your project, so like, for example, my project was called project template. If I cd into project template, I type the words node in my terminal, I can actually require any of the dependencies that I'm using in my app, and I can play around with them and see what the functions and methods are without going through all these big long build steps and everything just to see if my code is working. You can also use require.resolve, and that will tell you the path that the dependency lives at. So if you're getting all sorts of weird stuff about, this or that dependency is not defined, this is a good thing to check. Because if it's not going to work from the command line, then it's definitely not going to work from your app. Who here has heard of git bisect? Awesome. All right, git bisect is one of my favorite things. It's such a cool trick. What git bisect does is it gives you a systematic way to search through a bunch of commits and find where a problem was. So I'll go ahead and, how much time do we have? Do I have time for a live example of this? All right. So I'll give a live example of git bisect. So in this scenario, let's imagine that I worked on a feature a little while back, and I go back and I look at the source code, or not look at the source code, I go back and I run that app. The thing that I wrote broke. I must not have written a test for it, but I want to figure out when it broke, why it broke, because I knew that at one point things worked fine. So this is where git bisect comes in. I can actually use this tool to systematically locate the commit where things went wrong. So I'm going to first look through the commits, and I'm going to say like, all right, I know that it was working back here. This is the commit ID. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to say git bisect start. And then I'm going to say git bisect good. And I'm going to tell it, hey, at this point, things were good. And then, let's say all I know is that it's broken now. So let's see what the latest commit is. We're going to grab this one. Git bisect bad. Okay. So there's like, I don't know how many commits when there may be like 20 some commits between when things were working and things weren't. So right now, what this command, it doesn't say that it's asking me for this, but what he wants to know is, hey, I've checked out this commit, run the test, look at it in the browser. Is it still broken? So let's say I have a test that lets me know, like, you know, if the button that's blue is green instead or something like that. And I would say, okay, things are still broken here. So I'll do git bisect bad. Maybe on this commit I run my test, so I look at the browser and I see things are okay here. Good. All right, and then it's like, okay, one more. This is our last one. Let's say this one is bad. All right, it's got one more revision left. I thought we were there. Anyway. All right, so after checking the code or whatever it is for the thing that went wrong, it's gonna get you to a point where it says, this is the first bad commit. And so now, instead of looking through all of these commits, like 20 or to 30 different commits, to try and find where the problem is, this has helped me actually sort through them in the most efficient way that I could. Now, some drawbacks of git bisect is that this only works like this if you and your coworkers aren't committing broken code. So if I have done some like work in progress, untested, doesn't work, and I commit that, well, my tests aren't going to work, that button's not going to show up at all, the build's going to fail, and git bisect isn't going to help me at all. Also, squashing commits will reduce the effectiveness of git bisect. But most of the time that I'm using git bisect, I'm actually working on a production library or application where everything that's merged in has to have green tests. And so when you're working in that sort of environment, this can be really helpful. All right, so that is git bisect. All right, so I'll remind everybody of your goals here. So again, the talk was called Debugging Secrets of the Pros for everyone, and it's because everyone can use these tools in order to figure out what's going on, and that this will get you really far when you're working in unfamiliar code bases. So thanks everyone for listening. My name is Jen Weber. You can find me on Twitter or GitHub. I'm at all the Ember things. We have a meetup in August, I think August 15th. It's about inclusive app development and accessibility, so it's going to be great. I love to see y'all there. Even if you don't use Ember, it's good for us to all know about what those topics are. So thanks for coming.